everybody, welcome back for another sublimation tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at how we sublimate onto regular kitchen knives. These are non-sublimated kitchen knives. So I'm going to show you a technique that you can use that works well with the sublimation process so that you can get cool looking images and just decorative purposes. And as a disclaimer, these are only for decoration. Once you sublimate on them, they are non-usable for kitchen use or eating or cutting any kind of food that you're going to end up eating with. Also, when you're working with sharp instruments, you always want to be careful. So these are just from the dollar store that I tried to practice on. It actually worked really well with these. The only thing I do want to note is that if you have a plastic handle, don't put your press on the handle directly or right next to it because it does melt, and I did find that out in my first go. So if you have a clamshell press, you can stick the handle right up to the edge and close onto it. But if you have a Cricut press like I do, you just need to be aware of where your the metal heater is so that you're not touching that plastic or melting it. So we'll go ahead and get to this first step where we will use a lamination pouch. Make sure that it's a thermal lamination pouch or it will just melt and you won't get the right results. So the thermal pouches just come in a little pouch like this. You can tear it in half and end up with two little pouches here. I do already have a pre-cut lamination pouch from when I was testing earlier, and it fits pretty well, so I'm just gonna go ahead and reuse this. You do want butcher paper or parchment paper laying down on your mat or your heat press, whatever you prefer to use. I like parchment paper, it just works for me. But again, it's preference on what works best for you. So we'll go ahead and have our knife on the paper. You're gonna lay your sublimation sheet down with the matte side down and the glossy side should be facing upwards. And also one more note is that lamination pouches, they do tend to melt a smidge, just a little bit. So place it a little bit higher than where you think you're gonna want it, because it will shrink down just a little bit. So to keep away from my knife handle because it's plastic and I don't want to melt it, I'm going to move it down just a little bit and just kind of angle it like that. Again, if you have a metal handle, it's not going to matter. It's just the plastic handles that you need to be careful with. So we'll go ahead and have that placed there. You'll go ahead and place another piece of paper, butcher paper, parchment paper, over the top. And then we'll go ahead and do 400 degrees for 60 seconds. And if you're using a clamshell press, a more industrial press, your time might be a little bit different. But for me, it's 400 degrees at 60 seconds. And we'll go ahead and hold it on there. Good pressure for the full 60 seconds. All right, so go ahead and remove your heat press and the top parchment paper. Again, just be very, very careful that you're not touching it. It is hot and we are letting it cool off until we can handle it. So we'll go ahead and let it cool off and then we'll move to the next step. So it has cooled off enough to just kind of be able to handle it. You still want to be careful. I will show you that now you can see where I was saying where the lamination paper, it does shrink a little bit. You can kind of see a little bit of residue there from when it started up here, and it did shrink down a little bit. You can actually go when you're all done, or now if you want to, whichever you prefer, you can go and remove that with Goo Be Gone, which you can get at Walmart, and it wipes right off. So that's not a worry for me right now. We can remove it at the very end. So now we're gonna go ahead and place our image onto our knife. And for this part, I just like to cut off just a little bit of the edges, not everything, because we'll go and trim it out more precisely towards the end. So just like that. All right, so now we're gonna sublimate our image onto the knife. And when you take your image, you're gonna want to lay your image down. This is how I do it. I find that it works best. And then you'll lay your knife down right on the top of it to where you want it to be. So I'm gonna say right about there. And then my handle doesn't lay all the way down, so I make sure I'm pressing down on the image well enough and lift both up at the same time. That way I know the image is still where I want it to be. And then we'll take some heat resistant tape and just tape right across the middle. And then you can also go ahead and tape one a little bit lower as well, just to make sure that the bottom of it's staying in place as well. All right, so you'll notice that there's like kind of a weird lip right there, and we want to make sure that the image is flat against the knife. So I just go and cut right along where the handle is. And that way it's laying flat. And you just want to make sure that your image didn't move, which mine did a little bit. So you'll just go and replace it and make sure it's back to where it should be. And then you'll go ahead and turn it over. And I'll also place one more heat resistant tape just right there if you do have that space. And that way it really stays in place for you. All right, so now that we have the knife blade taped with the image, just making sure that the image is still flat, you'll lay your knife blade down on the mat or the press, and then make sure that it's just flat down. And you'll go ahead and place parchment paper back over the top of it. And then we'll heat the image at, again, 400 degrees for 60 seconds. All right, so we can go ahead and slide the press off. You'll remove your parchment paper, and always note that your sublimation image should kind of bleed through the back of the sublimation paper. It just means that it got a really good heat process and it looks like everything pressed really well, as long as you can see everything, kind of the whole image through the paper. Also, a good trick is just to really gently pull it back to make sure that it's sublimated. If it didn't, you can lay it back down and press again for a few more seconds just to get a good press. I'm gonna let that cool down for a couple of seconds, and then we will go ahead and remove the image. All right, so let's go ahead and remove our image. The knife blade is still a little bit warm, but I do like to peel when the image is still warm. I don't do cold peels, and then we'll let it cool off to finish everything up. And while you're peeling back, just make sure you're not pulling too hard to where you're gonna damage the lamination that's on the knife blade. You'll take your tape off. And once you have your tape off, we're going to completely let this cool off. That way we can handle it when we're removing the excess. But you can see the image on there. It's actually really cool. All right, so at this point, it should be cooled off enough to touch it. It might be still a little bit warm, but we can at least work with it right now and start cutting off the top edge. I do like to use an X-Acto knife, but if you want, you can use scissors. But the X-Acto knife gets a really good clean cut. So you'll just go ahead and take your X-Acto knife and cut a little hole in. And I like to almost lay my X-Acto knife almost flat and then just slide it across, and it makes a really, really clean cut that way. And just follow the knife blade all the way down and then go back and cut the top off just like that. And you can see it's a really clean cut, and you can go back and clean up whatever you need to. But that's why I use the X-Acto knife. It just works really well. Down here is a little bit different. If you have a straight blade, it's not gonna make a difference, but the one I have is a little bit jaggedy, so mine's gonna be a little bit different. But if yours is like the top and just fairly straight, you're not gonna have any issues. What I did with mine, I found worked pretty well, is I took, if you have jagged edge, I took the edge of it and basically just did the exact same thing and poked the hole through and just laid it down, making sure you're holding it really well and tight, and just sliding it over the blade. And it almost just kind of gave that copycat zigzag effect. It actually turned out pretty cool. We'll see how well it works this time here. Okay. So you can kind of see it did that copycat kind of zigzags along there. And then you can go ahead and just kind of clean it up. All right, so now that we have the knife cut out, sublimated, it looks really good. I'm going to show you what I meant was that goo be gone. It takes off goo super easy, especially when you're doing like tumblers and the tape. If it gets stuck on there, you just rub it on there and it comes off pretty easily. With a knife, you obviously want to be a little bit more careful. When you're doing it, just use caution. All right, so you can see there, the goo is pretty much gone and it's got a really clean line there. There might be just a little bit right there, but you can keep working on that. But that's how you sublimate these knives. It turns out to be really cool. It'll be a really cool Halloween decoration with the Mike Myers on there. So if you enjoyed this video, if this tutorial helped you, go ahead and boop that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share for others so they can get helped as well. Have a wonderful day and happy crafting.